Over the past 25 years, faith communities around the world have shown remarkable leadership on climate and nature. From the Assisi Declarations to Laudato Si, from local congregations to global coalitions. But at a time of polarization, misinformation, and mounting geopolitical tension, can this momentum be sustained? And can faith ensure that climate and biodiversity don't fade from public attention when they're needed the most? I'm Gopal Patel.
And I am Soulaima Gourani. You are listening to Faith in Action, an independent podcast by members of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Faith in Action. The views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the views of the World Economic Forum. Today, we have two fantastic guests. Our first guest is Rabbi Yonatan Neril, and he's the founder and executive director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development and the co-author of 4 books, including the Eco Bible, an ecological commentary on the Hebrew Bible.
And we also have Meryne Warah, who is director of GreenFaith Africa. She is a globally recognized advocate for climate justice, bringing grassroots activism and international policy. Welcome. Yonatan and Meryne, it's wonderful to have you with us. I want to start with a question to both of you. Across traditions, from Islamic principles of Khalifa to indigenous stewardship, Hindu reverence for nature, and Catholic concepts of integral ecology, faith has always had something to say about humanity's relationship with the natural world. I'm wondering, from your own religious perspectives, what makes faith communities uniquely positioned to drive environmental action today?
Thank you, Gopal and Soulaima, for inviting us here to this conversation today. I am a Seventh-day Adventist. I can say 15, 20 generations Seventh-day Adventist. And one of the things that I have seen amazingly well in terms of theology and the protection of the earth is the teaching around stewardship. This teaching around stewardship, which is all-encompassing. It's talking about the water we drink, during baptism, which has a very great significance to who we are as Seventh-day Adventists, because it talks about immersion. You have to be completely immersed in water when you're being baptized. And so with that came the teaching and the need to make sure that that water is clean. It is clean. For health purposes, of course, because when you're immersed in water, at some point you could fidget and gallop some water into your stomach. So if it was not clean, then it means you might be sick. At the same time, we believe in the stewardship that talks about, again, protecting your environment, which means that when you're taking care of your environment, it means you're keeping your neighborhood clean. It means you're keeping a small kitchen garden, because again, stewardship, as I said, all encompassing from a Seventh-day perspective, also talks about health and temperance, what you eat. And that has a very great correlation with the earth, because everything that we eat comes from the earth. So it has been very significant that as we are protecting our soil, so that we look at where we are dumping our waste. Because if we dump your toxic waste and it seeps into the soil and you plant your cassava, you will harvest that cassava, you will eat it, and you will get sick. So the relationship between how we take care of our environment with who we are as people, because our temples then our bodies are the temples of Christ, then has a very good 360 correlation. So as a Seventh-day Adventist, the religion has played a significant role into why it is important for me to protect the environment and also to pass that information from generation to generation. Thank you, Gopal.
Thanks, Meryne. Yonatan, I'm wondering if you could share from your experience.
Yes, so I do think that religions have an important role to play for a sustainable future. 85% of people on planet Earth affiliate with a religion. Religion is the biggest NGO on planet Earth. It has huge media, philanthropic, educational, financial institutions, and resources. But it's really a sleeping giant in terms of ecological and climate action. So the time has come to wake the sleeping giant. I think that your question is spot on. Can religious institutions help us to stay on focus for a sustainable future? That doesn't seem to be happening at the current time when humanity is sort of just going from crisis to crisis in what's called the polycrisis. But I do think that at an elevated spiritual state, we definitely have the potential for religious figures and clergy and lay leaders to help focus humanity on what's the most important things. There's a Jewish teaching that says, who is the wise person? The person who sees the long-term effect of their action. And the ecological crisis has spiritual roots, like short-term thinking, arrogance, egoism, and it has spiritual solutions, like long-term thinking, caring for other people, humility, caring for other creatures. And it's really the role of the millions of clergy and the millions of houses of worship on planet Earth to help the next generation inherit a thriving and sustainable planet.
Thank you very much. There's so much to dive into here. But can you share maybe a specific example? I mean, you both touch upon it, but is there any community, institution, or initiative that is really giving you some sort of hope at the moment? Anyone we particularly want to highlight that we should all know of?
I mean, one initiative that I take heart in knowing is an initiative called the Laudato Si Leadership Cohort, which is a new project of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Catholic Diocese of Lexington, Kentucky. It's an effort to engage dozens of especially young leaders to take forward the vision of Pope Francis that he put in his book Laudato Si on caring for our common home. And especially in the United States, where there's about 70 million Catholics, and it's one of the largest Catholic countries in the world. This signals that the main Catholic institution, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, is seeing that this is important and is trying to engage people further. That's one initiative, and I mean, there's many others from many faith traditions, but just to highlight one.
Meryne, do you have something that you want to highlight? I mean, you also touched upon it a little bit, but are there any others that you would like to highlight, maybe?
Yeah, to just add on, the conversation around adaptation and food sovereignty and security in Africa is a very big conversation, not only in Africa, but I would like to take Africa as a referencing point in this case. And so we have 80% of the sub-Saharan Africa fed from the agricultural practices in this region. And so at the same time, there's a conversation around food sovereignty and food security, which are very different and distinct. And so one of the things that makes religion significant is that now the conflict or rather the impasse around science and religion being very much out there. Now, there's a new initiative. It's not really new, but it's been coming out a lot more. And it's about talking about how can faith be in the center front of advocating for better agricultural practices that kind of protect food security and food sovereignty. And that conversation is around, farming God's way, so that the scientific way of conservation agriculture is presented to the faith community in a way that the faith community would understand it and push it forward. And so they call it farming God's way from the Christian perspective. And the Muslims call it farming Allah's way, from a Muslim perspective. And it has been amazing because it has been embraced in both faith communities. The Hindus are just thinking about it. I was talking to my friend from the Secretary General of the Hindu Council, and we were thinking about how then can that be also adopted from the Hindu faith, such that the faith community then becomes those who are in the center front of pushing this agenda forward, right? And so at this point in time, you see how faith kind of pushes the pin a little bit, because the millions and millions of people that go to places of worship then gets to hear this in the places of worship, that it is possible to farm God's way and it is possible to farm Allah's way in a way of trying to increase food productivity in our different congregations or our different communities. And I think that is one of those beautiful moments when you see faith communities and faith teachings and faith gatherings pushing the pin in a way to collaborate with what science puts out there. So that is one of the things that I wanted to push for. Thank you.
I definitely agree with that, Meryne, and there's a huge role that faith communities have to play and are playing in regards to sustainable food systems and regenerative agriculture. My organization did video series of 50 videos on religion and ecology. And the most popular one that we did was a video that got several million views of Sadhguru, who has the Save the Soil campaign. And so he's a Hindu Swami, he's a Hindu religious leader, and he's very active in terms of trying to make sure that the soil that is sort of the basis for all life on Earth, at least on the land, is healthy, and to try to focus religious teachings toward enabling us to have healthy soil.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It was beautiful because there's this interesting thing that makes people feel, or young people feel, woke, like they don't want to eat traditional food, right? Everybody wants to go to KFC, everybody wants to eat burgers, and they're thinking that is so sophisticated. But the conversation around conservation agriculture and farming God's way and making sure that the fertility and the dignity and sanctity of the soil is taken care of has made it possible for people to start loving the traditional food, but to start thinking about growing their own food, protecting their own soil, handling their own waste probably better, which I think is one of those beautiful things where religion brings back the traditional knowledge.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I mean, in the book of Genesis, the first so the first children of Adam and Eve are Cain and Abel, and Cain was a farmer, and the offering that he offered to God was of his vegetables. Now, according to one Jewish interpretation, the reason that God didn't accept Cain's offering was because he was supposed to offer his fruits. Because in some ways, fruits are a higher order of food than vegetables, because the tree produces them, and the tree is tall, etc. And so then when Abel, who offered an animal sacrifice and killed an animal, and then God favored that, so then Cain didn't really know what to do, and then he killed his brother. And according to one interpretation of Rabbi Yosef Albo, his killing of his brother was actually a human sacrifice. He said, well, if Abel's going to sacrifice an animal, then I'll sacrifice a human. As we know, the Bible says with Abraham that actually God doesn't want human sacrifices. But that's one example of how deep within religious traditions there's this whole conversation about food, and there's a lot more that can be done to activate clergy to talk about sustainable food, sustainable eating, healthy eating, organic, local, etc.
Yeah, I love that, because one last one, I promise, Gopal and Soulaima. I love what you're saying, Yonatan, because as I said, from a Seventh-day perspective, you see, the conversation around stewardship and the Garden of Eden, that theology fascinates me, because then it was a garden full of everything, every food that you can eat, every drink that you can take, every fruit that you can eat. And the only job that they were given, Adam and Eve were given, was take care of it, and you will not die, right? And so it tells you how important it is to look at the role religion plays in us taking care of the environment. So that's fascinating to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that verse, Genesis 2:15, and God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to till and to tend it, or as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs translates it, to serve it and to conserve it. That verse is sort of like teaches something different than Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, that God told the human being to conquer and dominate the animals and the plants and the birds. A lot of religious people, especially from the Judeo-Christian tradition, see the verse in Genesis chapter 1 about conquest and domination as giving them license to run rampant over creation. But according to many rabbis and pastors and priests within sort of the green ecological faith movement, that's not the case. And drawing on traditions that go back many centuries and millennia, really what God wants us to do is to care for creation, because why would God have given us a world for us to destroy? That just doesn't make any sense.
I'm really loving this conversation, and I'm sure our listeners are as well. And I think for many of them, this may be the first time they're hearing about this interconnection between faith and climate action. And they're probably more used to hearing things spoken about from like an economic perspective, a business perspective, or from a government perspective. And I'm wondering, there's a question that comes up for me often, which is that, these religious stories and ideas and the practical work is really amazing. But sometimes, it can come across as abstract or maybe sometimes a little bit too idealistic compared to market-driven forces and government solutions and international policy. So I'm wondering if the two of you could share, because I know both of you do this work at the local level, but also at the international level. What are the limits of these approaches working with faith groups, and what's the real value, and how can we bring faith perspectives in alignment with corporate and government solutions?
Well, the sky's the limit in terms of what's possible. As I said earlier, 85% of people on Earth affiliate with a religion. That's about 6.3 billion people. And so, a few examples: houses of worship that are going zero carbon. There's a movement of houses of worship, including from the Episcopal Diocese of California, with dozens of churches moving in that direction. When a house of worship and its clergy member become champions for ecological change, it makes an impact on the congregants. So we're talking about installing solar panels, doing composting, community gardens at the house of worship site, encouraging people to eat plant-based diets or at least be reducitarians or climatarians, meaning think more about how much meat and animal products they're consuming. These are just a few examples of when you go deep into the religious traditions and you see that there is a basis for sustainable living. And so then when the clergy talk about that and teach and preach about it, and when the house of worship actually implements that, that serves as an example that then has a multiplier effect over, the hundreds of people in that house of worship, and then on the earth toward billions of people.
Meryne, I'm wondering if you could share some of your examples of these kind of collaborations that could happen between faith, business, and government.
Yeah. So I always like looking at it from a point of they feed into each other. Business and religion and government, they feed into each other. When you're talking about policies, there are different steps to policies, the formation of it, the public participation of it, and also the implementation of it. And I want to concentrate on the fact that when you want to look for business leaders or business owners or tech people, researchers or academias, all of these people are found at one particular point in places of worship. And and at that point, I look at it like government is already in the place of worship. Business is already in the place of worship. And so it does not have to be either or. It has to be like in partnership. How can they be in partnership together so that they can do this thing that everybody believes that should be done? And so this is a question of, does government recognize the importance of faith in this conversation? Does research or academia or data people recognize the importance that faith brings into this conversation? And I think that I cannot say that they do not recognize it. I think that they have not realized it. Or if they have not realized it, then we have not accelerated that kind of participation. Because as I said, in one point in time, if you want to implement a policy, the best place to kind of do a little bit of a mock or research is in places where you can find people, so that policies are made for the sake of people, and those people, you'll always find them in places of worship. And one of the most interesting thing is that if a policy is redundant, and you take this same policy that is being rejected by probably everybody, and you give it to a rabbi, or you give it to a pastor, or you give it to a bishop, and they go and repeat the same policy without changing it in a place of worship, people will take it up. And that is kind of the kind of partnership that needs to be there. I think that what needs to happen is that there should be an intentional recognition of the huge contribution that faith brings in this conversation. Because if faith leaders and faith communities are recognized as important partners to have in this conversation, then we will be also in a place where we will say everybody is included. Because again, in the conversation of environmental protection and protection of the earth and taking care of the earth, it needs everybody. And so it's a question of, at what point do we recognize that also faith leaders are very important in this conversation?
Yeah, and I would just say in that regard that, My organization collaborated on the Faith Pavilion at COP28, the UN Climate Conference, and that was the first time there was a robust Faith Pavilion. There were 70 sessions and 330 speakers, and among the speakers were ministers of government and other political leaders, negotiators, who themselves are religious people. Because since the vast majority of people on earth affiliate with a religion, so therefore the vast majority of political leaders have a connection to religion. But it then begs the question, well, if that's the case, and if there's deep ecological linkages in religion for sustainability, well, then why are political leaders not leading us in the path? And because it's been since 1992 that political leaders have been negotiating on climate change, but every year the problem gets worse. And I think part of it has to do with the silence of religious leaders and clergy on this issue. Most clergy on planet Earth don't teach or preach about ecology with any regularity. And sometimes many in their careers never even say a word about it because they think it's a political issue. And but the work that Meryne and I are doing, and we're actually collaborating on a project, is we're trying to reveal that actually this is not a political issue. This is a religious issue that is across the board. Every religion says we should care for creation. It's sort of like a no-brainer. And then the question is how can that awareness seep into politics? Because politics is downstream of religion and culture. And so we're trying to sort of wake up this enormous potential for change, both at the political level and at the grassroots level.
Yeah, I agree, because you're looking at some of those traditional eco-friendly practices, and these traditional eco-friendly practices that are also deeply, deeply rooted in kind of structural religion or even, spiritual activities are also some of those things that we should be looking at, because I think the conflict comes in where people like faith communities might feel like environmental education is kind of deviating, it is deviating from what it was intended for. The intention was to keep the earth pure. But when we start thinking about issues that bring pollution, then they will deviate. But if there was a partnership in terms of saying, well, the activities we want to bring on board, or the policies we are bringing on board, are the policies that are supposed to protect, the spiritual fabric of taking care of the environment, or even if we're looking at, the policy support and incentives, at what point can we then ask government institutions and different places to make sure that those incentives are there? For example, when Yonatan, you're talking about, places of worship, I think that the faith community or religious communities are the second largest, richest communities in the world. And so when you're talking about incentives for policy support, why not partner with faith institutions and have probably renewable energy systems in places of worship as a pilot to see how it works, how it is managed in collaboration with whichever government that is in place, and also making sure that there is interfaith collaboration, because that's another thing. When there's no interfaith collaboration, then everything becomes, chaotic, being pulled left, right, and center. And probably the government feels like, okay, maybe I cannot talk to them because of that. But if we have such kind of collaboration in terms of discussing progressive, pragmatic policies, then I believe that faith and governmental initiatives would always work hand in hand.
Yeah, and this relates to another aspect of this work, which is it's not just about the earth or about nature or the environment. It's also about people, because on planet Earth, I would say that we have two main problems. One of them is war, and the other of them is degrading nature. We can't have sustainability without peace, and we can't have peace without sustainability. And so when we encourage interfaith collaboration, as Meryne talks about and is doing on the ground, then we actually help to achieve both, because the process of bringing together people from many faiths around ecological sustainability has the added benefit of actually encouraging people of many faiths to work together, including clergy and religious leaders. And that then enables greater coexistence and shared society and peace on earth.
Yeah, true. I believe that when I talk to people that I work with, especially at the grassroots level, the community level, one of the things that comes out very clear all the time is that the movements that exist because governments have failed, and so is the perception. And so these movements are always trying to kind of stand in the gap of what governments and collaborations need to do and corporations need to do, and yet they're not doing for the sake of the community that Yonatan is talking about. And so the relevance of faith in this particular moment is to bridge that gap and make sure that it fosters citizen collaboration. There is no policy in any country in the world that becomes progressive if there is no collaboration and engagement, citizen and civic engagement and feedback. And so faith communities then becomes that basket where you get the people and where you can have that civic engagement, where you can have that citizen engagement. And I think this is a low hanging fruit that we need to start putting forth, and where, we need to start saying, you need people. Faith communities have those people. You want to do civic engagement or citizen participation on a climate change policy? Partner with the faith community, and you'll have those people at thousands at one particular time, so that you bridge the gap between, do we need more movements? Probably we'll still need movements, but not movements because government and communities are not talking to each other. And because now that will have been taken care of, faith communities are here. They will mobilize masses of people in every part of the world, in every community, so that a particular policy has the meaningful engagement and involvement that communities need to have and people need to have in order for them to own a particular conversation. Thank you.
My God, we could listen to this for hours, and I agree with Gopal so much that I think most people never thought that environmental activities and policies would ever be related to faith communities. But I love what you both are saying. If we want to establish sustainable future, we need to engage faith communities, interfaith communities. Since you are both role models at scale, we were curious if we could ask you a more personal question. And I don't know who wants to go first, but let me just share the question with you. How do you embody your faith's environmental values in your own work, day to day? Maybe you can even give us some specific moments where your principles directly shaped a decision that you have made in your life. This can be very early in life, or it can be more recent. We're just curious how you exercise specifically and very concrete.
Yeah, so I'll share with that, and just to point out that, in hearing what Meryne shared, many people don't realize that Jews and Seventh-day Adventists observe the Sabbath from Friday at sunset until Saturday night. And so there's actually this commonality. Seventh-day Adventists are Christians and Jews are Jews, and we observe the Sabbath on the same day. And such commonalities exist between people of faiths in many different ways. As I like to say, the other is a brother of a different mother, sister of a different mister. It's not about us versus them. It's about us and them and how we can find common cause with each other. For me personally, I try to live out the values of ecological sustainability in different ways. I have a balcony, small vegetable garden. I take my family's food waste to compost nearby at a community composting place. My wife and I don't own a car. I try to reduce my airplane travel, usually to a couple international trips a year, and then to combine trips when possible. I try to eat a vegan diet. I have a bicycle. So, I try to reduce my food waste. These are a few practical ways that I try to live out the values so that I'm not just, writing it and preaching it, but actually trying to, walk the walk as well.
Yeah, and I remember there was this thing also that used to happen in my family, which I still, again, I didn't understand what it meant, but now I understand it. My dad was a church elder, and if you go to my village, which is several kilometers drive from Nairobi where I live, if you go to my dad's compound, that is our home right now, it's full of fruit trees. Then I didn't understand why my dad only wanted to have mangoes, avocados, and apples and whatnot in our garden. I didn't understand, but now I kind of understand it because every time I'm in the village and we want to go to church and whatever is in season, then you have to just pluck it and go to church. And also the practice of like the discipline that comes with protecting the earth. I am on my son's case every time. When you get from your bathroom, please switch off the lights. When you're brushing your teeth, make sure you turn off the tap. And when you're going somewhere, don't litter from the window of the car. It was so rampant. People just throw things from the window. So you realize that there's so tiny information and messages that you can, take and give, and people will take them and take them forward, and they still contribute to the protection and preservation of the environment.
Thank you both so much for such a rich conversation. And as we're coming up to time, I'm thinking how we can close this beautiful gathering together. And what's coming to me is I'm wondering if both of you could share one idea, one principle from your traditions or what you've seen in other traditions that you really feel the world needs to hear right now to address the climate and nature crisis that can bring into partnership both faith communities, governments, and the business community. What is one thing that you want the world to know or that you feel we need to really focus on from your own traditions or from another tradition that you really take inspiration from? I'm wondering if who'd like to go first with that one.
Well, I would share a story that the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison told of a young boy who came to an elder woman with a bird in his hands. And he said to her, "Can you tell me whether the bird in my hands is alive or dead?" And she thought to herself, and she realized that the boy was playing a trick on her. If she said the bird was dead, then he would open his hands and the bird would fly away and she'd be wrong. And if she said that the bird was alive, he would close his hands and crush the bird and she would also be wrong. He had her coming and going. So she thought to herself for a minute and she said to the young boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." And that's really our situation today. Each of us has power. Each of us has responsibility. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik commented on Descartes, who said, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. And Rabbi Soloveitchik said, "I am, therefore I am responsible." And that's really a key religious value, both in my tradition and many other traditions, this idea of taking responsibility, that the political leaders may or may not save the world. And the business leaders have a role to play, as do scientists and people of faith, everyone. And so really to think to ourselves, what can I do in my own sphere of influence? What can I do to enable a sustainable planet? I think that's really an important question for us to think about.
Love that call to action, Yonatan. Meryne, same question to you.
Yeah, and I want to kind of lean into what Yonatan has said. Again, I'm going to quote something from an African origin. My favorite thing is the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because you are. You are because I am. And we cannot be without the earth that we live in. We pollute the earth, we pollute ourselves. And so what I think that needs to go as a call to action out here is that it is important for us to start thinking about value-driven advocacy. And value-driven advocacy is very important. Sometimes it might not be very obvious because probably the world is not as religious as we think, or everybody else is not as religious as we think. But value-driven advocacy is very important. And also looking at the fact that at some point politics can say, well, we need to leverage, politics should take a minute to breathe, take a breath in and say, can we then leverage on the ethical influence of the environmental stewardship that is given from the faith communities, because that is very important, yeah? And also thinking about how can we engage in practical ecological restoration, because the world is the air that we breathe, the world is the soil that we walk on, the world is the water that we drink, and the world is the forest that is around us, and everything in between, and the animals. And all these things deserve to be protected. And that is why Noah was asked in the Bible to build an ark. And in that ark, 2 types of species were supposed to get into the ark, which means every other important thing was supposed to get into the earth. So it is important for politics and governments and every other corporation to remember that what faith communities want is the same thing as what the government wants: sustainability, and also upholding the rights of every person in the world to live in a safe, clean, and productive environment. It cannot happen if we do not think about restorative economy. It is very important for us to think about that, because the world was created to heal itself, to regenerate itself. And so if only politics or politicians can collaborate with faith leaders who will then be in a position to help them see that it is important to have a lucrative economy that regenerates itself if we lean into each other as opposed to working us versus them.
I think we have now gotten a pretty good understanding of why religion and sustainability goes hand in hand. And I don't know about you, Gopal, but wouldn't it be incredible to have political debates or even board meetings where not only nature has a seat at the table, but also religious leaders? Imagine one day that you have a public listed company, but before they launch any products or new strategy, or before they buy a new piece of land and build a data center on it, they actually have a meeting with faith leaders in the community to discuss how this will impact the surroundings. It will be incredible. And I really liked what you said, Meryne, about regeneration, to regenerate and think of that in a circular way. And Rabbi Yonatan, a wise person is someone that thinks long term, that understands the long term consequences, not only 2 generations, but maybe 7, 8, 10 generations out in the future. And I love that you go vegan. I love that so much. It's a very practical way to help sustain the environment. I don't know about you, Gopal. Are you going to skip your coffee, your chocolate? Are you going to go vegan? All of that? Or what inspired you from today?
Yeah, it's been a really wonderful, inspirational conversation. I am mostly vegan. I still eat dairy. So that is something I've been doing for a number of years. I think one phrase that stood out for me, and I think, Meryne, you mentioned values-led advocacy. And I think that's what we're talking about here. The world is in a crisis, a values crisis right now. And I think the more we can center the work and the world around values and what is a good life and what is good for the long term, I think we have a shot at addressing this environmental, climate, and nature crisis.
So both of you, thank you so much for coming in today. We hope this will be the first of many conversations, not only with you, but also with many other faith leaders. And we are very happy that you made the time today for joining us. Gopal, any final remarks?
Nothing else from me. Rabbi Yonatan, Meryne, it was a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.